The starship Aurora's spear moved silently through the endless dark of space. Its silver hull glowed faintly in the light of distant stars. Inside, hundreds of crew members worked on their daily tasks, each role important to keep the great vessel running. Among the crew were humans and aliens, working side by side under one banner. In the engineering section, a young human named Daniel adjusted a power conduit with steady hands. He was tall, with calm eyes, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Though not the most experienced engineer, Daniel had a talent that others noticed. He could find simple solutions to difficult problems. Beside him stood Zira, a member of the Valari race. The Valari were tall, strong, and serious beings. Their scales shimmered faintly under the ship's lights, and their voices carried an echo that made every word sound important. Zira had been assigned to work with Daniel as his colleague, though. She often reminded him that she was far more skilled and disciplined. Still, Daniel did not mind. He had learned to enjoy her company even if she rarely smiled. He respected her sharp mind and precise movements. While other Valari engineers worked coldly, Zira sometimes showed emotions, brief flashes of irritation, pride, or even curiosity. Daniel found it strange but also interesting. That day, the engineering section was quiet, except for the hum of the engines. Daniel leaned over a panel, wiping sweat from his forehead. "All right, that should stabilize the coolant flow," he muttered, mostly to himself. Zira glanced at the readings, her yellow eyes narrowing. "Acceptable," she said. Her voice was flat, as always. Daniel chuckled softly. "You could say good job, you know." She tilted her head. "Valari do not praise until the task is complete." He shrugged. "Fair enough." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel, trying to lighten the mood, added, "Oh, I ran into Officer Lena earlier. She asked me about the power core. She seemed impressed with our work. It was meant as a simple comment, just a small piece of conversation to pass the time. But the moment the words left his mouth, everything changed." Zira's hand tightened into a fist. Her chest rose and fell sharply, her scales shifting color ever so slightly. Before Daniel could react, she slammed her clawed hand down on the control panel. "Crash!" Sparks flew, alarms rang, and the panel flickered out of life. The hum of the engines stuttered for a moment, and the lights above them dimmed. Daniel jumped back, eyes wide. "Zira! What are you doing?" he shouted. Her face was tense, her jaw tight. "Do not speak of another female to me," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. Daniel stood frozen, confused. "What? I was just talking about—" "Enough!" she snapped, turning away. The alarms continued to blare, and the room filled with red warning lights. Daniel forced himself to focus on the problem. He rushed to another console and began shutting down secondary circuits to prevent further damage. The ship shuddered slightly, as if protesting against the sudden disruption. Crew members from nearby sections peeked through the doorway, eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" one of them asked. Daniel didn't answer. He was too busy trying to contain the situation. Sparks still crackled from the broken panel, and the smell of burnt metal filled the air. Finally, after several tense moments, the emergency systems kicked in. The alarms quieted, though a low warning tone continued to echo in the background. The ship was stable, but the navigation system was offline. Daniel turned back to Zira. She stood stiff, her hands trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it. For the first time since he had met her, she looked uncertain. "You just smashed our navigation controls," Daniel said slowly. His voice was calm, though his heart was racing. "Do you realize what you've done?" Zira didn't answer. Her glowing eyes avoided his. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had seen angry people before, but nothing like this. Aliens were supposed to be more controlled, more disciplined. Yet here was Zira, One of the proud Valeri, losing control over, what? A simple comment about another female officer? The crew who had gathered whispered among themselves. Some looked suspiciously at Daniel, as if he had caused the outburst. Others shook their heads, muttering about Valari pride. Daniel raised his hands. I'll handle this. Everyone else back to your posts. The crew slowly dispersed, though not without curious glances. When they were alone, Daniel stepped closer to Zira. He kept his voice soft, careful not to provoke her further. Look, I don't know why you reacted like that, but we have a problem. Now. The navigation system is down, and the captain will want answers. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She finally spoke, her voice low. Do not speak of another female with me again. Daniel blinked. That's what this is about? Zira said nothing more. She simply turned away, her shoulders stiff. Daniel exhaled heavily. He didn't understand her culture, but he knew one thing. This was bigger than a broken panel. Something about her people's ways, something about loyalty or pride, had been triggered. But right now, the more urgent matter was the ship itself. He tapped the communicator on his wrist. Engineering to command, he said. We've had a system failure in navigation. Requesting temporary reroute through auxiliary controls, the captain's voice replied, sharp and demanding. Failure? What happened down there? Daniel hesitated, glancing at Zira. She stood silently, her eyes fixed on the floor. Just a technical mishap, Daniel said finally. I'll take care of it. The channel closed, but the pressure remained. Daniel knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. Still, he chose not to expose Zira. Not yet. He sat down near the broken panel, pulling out his tools. Sparks, still, danced across the wires and smoke curled into the air. As he worked, his thoughts churned. Why would Zira, proud and disciplined, act in such a way? Why would a simple mention of another officer cause such a violent reaction? He looked up at her. She had not moved, her figure tall and unmoving against the dim light of the room. Her silence spoke louder than words. And so in the heart of Aurora's spear, a strange new tension was born. Between human and alien, between reason and emotion, between Daniel's curiosity and Zira's guarded pride. Neither of them knew it yet, but this small spark of conflict would grow into something far greater, something that would test not only their partnership, but also the fragile trust between their entire species. For Daniel, it had started with a single careless sentence. For Zira, it had struck at the deepest code of her people. And for the ship itself, it was only the beginning of trouble. The damage in the engineering section lingered like a heavy shadow over the Aurora's spear. Even after the alarms had silenced, a low warning tone pulsed through the ship. It reminded everyone that something was wrong. Daniel sat near the half-burned control panel, his hands moving quickly as he tried to reconnect the systems. The smell of melted wires clung to the air. Sparks occasionally jumped, making him flinch, but he kept working. His face was calm, though inside his thoughts raced. Zira stood a few steps away, silent. Her yellow eyes flickered in the dim light, but she refused to meet Daniel's gaze. She kept her arms folded tightly across her chest, her tall figure rigid, like stone. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You know, he said softly, the navigation system is one of the most important parts of this ship. Without it, we're blind. If we drift too far, we could end up in restricted space or worse. Zira gave no reply. Her jaw tightened, and her chest rose and fell as if she was still controlling her breath. Daniel sighed. He wasn't angry, though he had every right to be. Instead, he felt curious and unsettled. Why did you do that, Zira? I only said Officer Lena asked me about the power core. That's all. Her scales shifted color for a moment, an involuntary reaction of the Valari, but she said nothing. "Fine," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "You don't want to talk? Then at least help me fix this mess." He passed her a tool. For a long second, he thought she wouldn't take it. Then slowly, she reached out and accepted it. They worked in silence. Daniel crawled under the broken panel, tightening wires, while Zira handled the heavy cables with her steady claws. Together, they began to reroute the damaged systems into auxiliary circuits. But even with both of them, the process was slow and dangerous. Every few minutes, the communicator on Daniel's wrist beeped. Officers from the bridge wanted updates. The captain's voice came once, sharper than before. "Engineer Daniel," the captain said, "we're drifting 2 degrees, off course. If you don't restore navigation in the next hour, we'll be forced to make a full engine shutdown. That will leave us vulnerable." Daniel tapped the communicator. "Understood, Captain. I'm working on it." When the channel closed, Daniel exhaled. He looked up at Zira, who was carefully tightening a circuit coil. "You hear that? We don't have time for silence. If we don't fix this, the entire crew will know exactly what happened." Her hand stopped mid-turn. For a brief moment, her face revealed something he rarely saw: uncertainty. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and heavy. "I lost control." Daniel blinked, surprised she admitted it so directly. "Yeah, I noticed." Zira's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in them this time. Instead, there was something more complicated: conflict. "Among my people," she said slowly, "speaking of another female in such a way, it carries meaning. It implies disloyalty, carelessness." Daniel paused. He thought back to her reaction. The way her voice trembled, the way she smashed the panel. It hadn't been just anger. It had been something deeper. "I didn't mean anything by it," Daniel said carefully. "Humans, we don't think like that. I was just making conversation." Her gaze dropped. "Then I misunderstood." Daniel nodded slowly. "You did. But, misunderstanding or not, we have to fix this before the captain starts asking too many questions." For the first time since the incident, Zira gave a short nod. "Agreed." Together, they bent over the broken systems again. Their hands moved quickly, sometimes brushing against each other as they reached for tools. Daniel explained his method step by step, using human improvisation to work around the missing parts. Zira followed, her disciplined movements complementing his creativity. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Sweat beaded on Daniel's forehead as he twisted the final wire into place. Sparks jumped. Then the panel flickered back to life. Green. Lights danced across the screen, and the warning tone finally stopped. Daniel leaned back with a sigh of relief. "Navigation's back online, at least partially. We'll need a full repair later, but for now we're safe." The communicator beeped again. The captain's voice filled the room. "Engineering status?" Daniel pressed the button. "Navigation is functional again, Captain. The ship is stable." There was a pause. Then the captain replied, "Good work, but I expect a full report on what caused the failure." The channel closed. Daniel stared at the silent communicator for a moment before turning to Zira. She was already standing tall again, her face hard, her emotions locked away behind Valeri discipline. "They'll want answers," Daniel said quietly. "They will," Zira admitted. "And what should I tell them? That you lost your temper because I said another officer's name?" Her eyes flashed. "You will not tell them that." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then give me something else to say, because right now, I'm the one covering for you." Silence stretched between them again. The tension was heavy, but it was different now. Less angry, more like a storm that had passed but left the sky unsettled. Finally, Zira said, "Say it. Was a power surge. Say the panel was unstable." Daniel considered it. Lying to the captain was dangerous, but exposing Zira was worse. Not because he feared her, but because he had begun to realize there was more to her outburst than pride. There was a cultural weight behind her actions, something humans couldn't easily understand. "Fine," Daniel said at last. "A power surge it is." Her eyes met his. For the first time, there was something softer there. Not gratitude exactly, but something close. A silent recognition of the choice he had made. The moment passed quickly. She straightened her posture, returning to her usual serious form. "Then the matter is settled." Daniel shook his head. "No, Zira, this isn't settled. Not between us. Something's going on here, and I'm going to find out what it is." Her expression tightened, but she didn't argue. She simply turned away, heading toward the far wall where the tool racks were stored. Daniel watched her go, his mind heavy with questions. Why did the Valari take loyalty so seriously? Why did she care if he mentioned another officer's name? And why, despite her anger, did she let him cover for her? As the ship continued its steady path through space, Daniel realized one thing. Clearly, the partnership between him and Zira had just become far more complicated, and the whispers among the crew were already starting. Some said the human had caused the failure. Others said the Valari had been influenced by his strange ways. Whatever. The truth was, Daniel knew one thing. This was only the beginning of their troubles. The days after the incident felt different for Daniel. The engineering section returned to normal, the hum of the engine steady once again, but the air between him and Zira remained heavy. She performed her duties with the same sharp focus as before, but she avoided speaking to him unless necessary. Even then, her words were clipped and formal. Daniel, however, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The image of her smashing the panel replayed in his mind. It wasn't just an outburst. It was something deeper, something tied to her people's culture. He had worked with other Valari before, and they were strict, disciplined, sometimes cold, but never reckless. Zira's reaction didn't fit what he knew. One evening, when his shift ended, Daniel sat in the quiet of the crew library. The Aurora's Spear carried a massive database of records, alien histories, treaties, technical manuals, even cultural studies. He scrolled through the files on the Valari, hoping for an answer. The records spoke of a society built on loyalty. To the Valari, loyalty was not just duty. It was life. Families, teams, and even entire fleets were bonded by strict codes. Betrayal, even something small, was considered unforgivable. Daniel frowned as he read. Could it be that when he mentioned Officer Lena, Zira saw it as some kind of betrayal? He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. No wonder she got angry, he muttered. To her, it wasn't just words. Still, he felt unsettled. He hadn't meant anything by it. To him, talking casually about another officer was nothing unusual. But for Zira, it seemed to mean something entirely different. The next day, Daniel returned to duty. He found Zira already at her station, inspecting the newly replaced circuits. She stood tall, her movements precise. "Morning," Daniel said, trying to sound normal. She gave a short nod. "The repairs are holding." "That's good," Daniel replied. He hesitated, then added, "Listen, Zira, I've been reading about Valari customs." Her head snapped toward him, her yellow eyes sharp. "You studied my people?" "I had to," Daniel said calmly. "I don't like working in the dark. I think I understand now. When I mentioned another female officer, you saw it as disloyalty." Zira's scales shifted slightly, a sign of unease. She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, "You speak too directly." Daniel raised his hands. "I'm just trying to understand. I didn't mean it like that. Among humans, it's normal to mention co-workers or friends. It doesn't mean betrayal. It doesn't mean I value our partnership any less." For the first time since the incident, Her expression softened, just a little. "Your ways are strange." He smiled faintly. "Strange, maybe, but not dishonest." Before she could reply, the engineering alarm beeped. A red light flashed on. The console. Daniel quickly leaned forward. "Unidentified signal detected," the computer reported. Zira's posture stiffened. "We are entering uncharted space." Daniel frowned. "How did we get this far off course?" "Because navigation was damaged," she said coldly, though there was no true blame in her tone, only fact. The signal repeated, a faint pulse echoing through the systems. Daniel traced the readings. It wasn't natural. It was artificial. Someone, or something, was out there. Moments later, the communicator on Daniel's wrist beeped. "Engineering, report," came the captain's voice. Daniel pressed the button. "We're picking up signals. Unknown origin." The captain's voice was steady but firm. "Stand by. The bridge will investigate. Maintain system readiness." The channel closed. Daniel exchanged a look with Zira. For once, her guarded expression revealed something else. Concern. Hours passed as the Aurora's spear glided deeper into the unknown region. The signals grew stronger until finally the ship's sensors revealed them. Strange shapes drifting in the void. Dozens of them. Zira leaned closer to the screen. "Not ships," she murmured. "Machines." Daniel narrowed his eyes. The shapes were like floating shells, their surfaces jagged and broken. But each one pulsed faintly with energy. "Scavenger drones," Zira said grimly. "I've heard of them. They strip vessels apart, taking whatever they need." Daniel's stomach tightened. "And with navigation still unstable, we cannot escape quickly," she finished. The ship trembled slightly as the scavenger drones began to stir. Their sensors lit up, and they turned toward the Aurora's spear. Daniel felt his heart race. "Well, looks like we're about to have more problems than broken panels." Zira's eyes locked on his. "Then we must work together." Her words were firm, but Daniel could sense the change in her tone. She wasn't just talking about repairs anymore. She was acknowledging their partnership even after all that had happened. They rushed to the systems console, preparing the ship's defenses. Daniel rerouted power toward the shields, while Zira began adjusting the weapon circuits. The room buzzed with urgency. As he worked, Daniel risked a glance at her. "You know, maybe our ways aren't so different after all. You value loyalty. Humans value trust. And right now, I trust you." For a moment, she froze. Her claws hovered over the console. Then, slowly, she gave a small nod. "And I will not fail your trust again." Outside, the scavenger drones drew closer, their mechanical forms glittering in the starlight. The crew braced for confrontation, and in the heart of engineering, a human and a Valari, divided by culture but united, by necessity, prepared for the storm ahead. Neither spoke further, but something had shifted between them. The wall of silence that had stood since the incident was beginning to crack. For Daniel, it was not just about fixing machines anymore. It was about fixing the fragile bond that had been shaken. For Zira, it was about learning that trust could be as strong as loyalty, perhaps even stronger. And as the scavenger drones spread out across the void, the true test of that bond was about to begin. The Aurora's spear drifted through the unknown stretch of space. The stars outside looked distant and cold, but Daniel barely noticed them. His eyes were locked on the scanner display in front of him. The shapes that filled the screen were moving now, dozens of them, scavenger drones, just as Zira had guessed. They spread out like a hunting pack, circling the ship with mechanical precision. Their jagged shells glimmered faintly, and tiny sparks flashed across their surfaces. These were not living creatures, but they were no less dangerous. Daniel swallowed hard. "They're locking onto us." Zyra's claws tapped across the console, sharp and controlled. Their sensors have identified us as prey. Once they attach, they will cut through our hull and drain our systems. Like space vultures, Daniel muttered. Her yellow eyes narrowed. Worse. Vultures wait until death. These cause it. The ship's intercom buzzed, and the captain's voice filled the room. All stations, prepare for contact. Shields up. Weapons armed. Daniel's hands flew over the controls, rerouting extra power into the shield generator. The hum of the engines deepened as the systems adjusted, but the navigation system was still unstable, and without it, the ship couldn't make a quick escape jump. They were trapped, for now. The first drone struck. Clang! The entire ship shuddered as a jagged machine latched onto the outer hull. Its claws dug in like hooks, sending vibrations through the walls. Sparks scattered across Daniel's console as the power grid fluctuated. "Drone has attached to Section 3, shouted Zira, her voice sharp. "They are attempting to drain. Energy!" Daniel cursed under his breath. "I'll reroute the conduits. Buy us time." He typed rapidly, forcing power away from the affected section. The drone hissed and crackled, its glowing eyes flaring as its prey slipped from its grasp. But more drones were coming, 2 on the starboard side, Zira barked. Her claws danced over the weapons console. Beams of blue energy fired from the ship's cannons, striking one drone and tearing it apart. The second swerved, avoiding the blast, then shot a line of burning plasma toward the hull. The ship shook again. The lights above flickered. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Shields are holding, but not for long. We need to think bigger." Zyra's jaw tightened. "What do you suggest, human?" Daniel glanced at the secondary conduits. An idea formed, risky and untested. "We can reroute auxiliary power into the weapon grid, overload it for one massive discharge. It could clear the drones around us in one shot." Zyra's eyes widened slightly. "That is reckless. If the conduits fail, the discharge could cripple our entire system." Daniel met her gaze. "Or save the ship. Do you trust me?" Her claws froze for a heartbeat. Then she gave a sharp nod. "Show me the path. I will follow." They moved quickly, side by side. Daniel crawled under a smoking panel, pulling wires. Free with his bare hands. Sparks burned his fingertips, but he ignored the pain. Above him, Zyra slammed her claws into heavy circuits, twisting them with strength no human could match. Together, they redirected the flow of energy toward the main weapon grid. The ship groaned under the strain. Warning lights blinked across. "Every screen! System at 90% capacity," Daniel called out. "Almost there!" Another crash shook the room as a drone dug its claws into the hull, piercing a thin layer of armor. Zira's eyes flicked to the alert. "They are breaching outer plating." "Then we'd better move faster," Daniel shouted. At last, the rerouting was complete. Daniel slid out from under the panel, his hands blackened with smoke. "Do it!" he yelled. Zyra slammed her claw onto the weapon control. A brilliant wave of blue energy burst from the ship's cannons, expanding outward. In all directions. The scavenger drones were caught mid-attack, their jagged shells glowing before bursting apart into fragments. The ones closest to the ship disintegrated instantly, the rest scattered, their formations broken. The blast rocked the Aurora's spear, throwing Daniel against the wall. He groaned, clutching his shoulder. Sparks rained from above, and the entire room filled with the smell of burning circuits. For a long moment, nothing moved. Only the steady hum of the engines remained. Then the scanner cleared, showing empty space. The drones were gone. Daniel let out a long breath, slumping against the wall. "We did it!" Zira stood tall, her chest rising and falling heavily. Her scales shimmered faintly in the dim light. She looked at Daniel, and for once, there was no anger in her eyes, only respect. "You risked everything," she said quietly. Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yeah, but it worked." The intercom crackled. The captain's voice carried across the ship. "Engineering report." Daniel tapped his communicator with shaking fingers. "The drones have been destroyed, but the overload damaged several conduits. We'll need time to restore full power." "Understood," the captain replied. "You've bought us breathing room." "Well done." The channel closed. Silence filled the engineering bay again, broken only by the hiss of cooling wires. Daniel looked at Zira. "You know, humans do reckless things all the time. It's kind of our specialty." Her lips twitched, almost like the shadow of a smile. "Reckless," she repeated. "And yet, effective." Daniel chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." They worked together to stabilize the remaining systems, but the tension that had once hung between them felt lighter now. Something had shifted during the battle. Zira had trusted him despite her doubts, and he had trusted her strength and precision. As they secured the last panel, Daniel glanced at her again. "You know, Zira, maybe loyalty and trust aren't so different after all. You stand by your people. I stand by mine. But when it comes down to it, we stood by each other." She met his gaze, her voice firm. "Yes, and I will remember that." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to their fragile alliance. The scavenger drones had been defeated, but Daniel knew this was only a small victory. More dangers lay ahead. Yet for the first time since the smashed panel, he felt hopeful. He and Zira were no longer just colleagues forced to work together. They were partners, and in the vast darkness of space, that partnership might be the one thing strong enough to carry them through what was coming next. The Aurora's spear floated quietly after the battle, but the silence was heavy. The emergency lights still blinked across the engineering bay, and the air smelled of smoke and burnt metal. The massive energy discharge had destroyed the scavenger. Drones. But the cost was high. Several power conduits were damaged. The ship's engines ran on reduced capacity. And worst of all, the overload had left the navigation system even more unstable than before. Daniel knelt on the floor, examining a scorched wire bundle. His hands were blackened with soot, and his shirt clung to him with sweat. He winced as he tried to move his shoulder, which had slammed into the wall during the blast. Still, he kept working, refusing to stop. Zira stood above him, her yellow eyes scanning the system readouts. Her tall frame was still and sharp, like a statue carved from stone. But inside, she was unsettled. She had seen Daniel throw himself into danger without hesitation, crawling under sparking panels and handling live wires with his bare hands. Such recklessness was strange to her, but it had saved the ship. "You should rest," Zira said at last. "Your shoulder is injured. A human body cannot endure such strain for long." Daniel gave a short laugh, though his voice was tired. "If I rest, the ship won't fix itself. We're still running on broken systems. If another swarm of drones finds us, we're finished." Her jaw tightened. "Still, you risk too much. Even Valari engineers would not handle live conduits without armor." Daniel looked up at her, a faint grin on his face. "That's the difference between us. Humans don't always think about the danger. We just do what needs to be done." Zira said nothing, but her scales flickered faintly, betraying her thoughts. They worked side by side through the long hours, patching circuits and rerouting power. Sparks flashed again and again, and once a cable burst into flame. Daniel quickly smothered it with his jacket, coughing from the smoke. "Careless," Zira muttered, pulling the ruined cable free with her claws. "Creative," Daniel corrected, smiling through the soot on his face. Despite her words, Zira felt something shift. Inside her, she had always believed loyalty meant perfection, never making mistakes, never showing weakness. But here was a human who stumbled, who bled, who risked recklessness, yet somehow turned those flaws into strength. Hours later, the bridge called for a status update. The captain's voice was sharp over the communicator. Engineering report. How long until navigation is fully restored? Daniel tapped the button, his voice steady, though his body ached. We're making progress, Captain. The system should be stable within the next cycle. Good. We cannot afford another surprise in this region. Keep me informed. The channel closed, and Daniel slumped against the wall for a moment. His hands trembled from exhaustion. Zira watched him silently. At last, she spoke. You are not like others of your kind. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh? How many humans have you worked with before? Only a few, she admitted. They followed orders. They obeyed systems. But you ignore rules when you believe there is another way. Daniel chuckled. Yeah, that's kind of what makes us human. We improvise. Sometimes it gets us into trouble, but sometimes it saves the day. Before Zira could answer, the scanner alarm beeped again. Daniel and Zyra rushed to the console. A new wave of signals appeared on the screen, smaller this time, but closer. More scavenger drones were approaching, drawn by the earlier battle. Daniel groaned. Of course they'd come back. We don't have full weapons power yet. Zira's eyes narrowed. Then we must act quickly. Daniel thought fast. The drones were still minutes away, but the ship's systems were too weak for another big blast. He scanned the engineering schematics, searching for another option. There's one thing we can try, he said finally. Zira tilted her head. Explain. We can use the maintenance conduits that run near the outer hull. If I manually reconnect the damaged lines from inside the crawl space, we can restore partial weapons power. Enough to fight them off. Her eyes hardened. The conduits are unstable. Energy surges could kill you. Daniel smiled faintly. Then I'll just have to be careful. No, Zira snapped, her voice sharper than usual. This is not acceptable. You have risked yourself enough. Daniel looked at her seriously. Zira, if we don't do this, the ship will be defenseless. Everyone on board, human and Valari alike, will be in danger. Sometimes you have to take risks for others. That's what loyalty means to me. Her breath caught. His words struck deeper than she expected. Loyalty to her people was about never straying, never faltering. But Daniel showed a different side of it. Loyalty as sacrifice, loyalty as trust. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Very well. But I will go with you. Together they entered the maintenance crawl space. The narrow tunnel buzzed with unstable energy, and the walls shook with each surge. Sparks lit the darkness, and the air smelled of ozone. Daniel crawled forward, his shoulder throbbing with pain, but he pressed on. Zira followed closely, her claws steady against the metal. At last, they reached the junction. The main conduit was broken, its glowing wires sparking dangerously. Daniel pulled out his tools. All right, here goes nothing. He reached in, gripping the live wires with insulated clamps. The current surged, shaking his arms. Pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth. Almost. Got it. Zyra steadied the conduit with her strength, holding it in place so he could connect the final line. Their movements were in perfect sync, human creativity and alien precision working as one. Finally, with a burst of light, the system reactivated. The hum of the weapons grid returned, stronger this time. Daniel let out a breath of relief. It's online. Zira's eyes softened as she looked at him. You risked your life without hesitation. Daniel smiled weakly. I told you. That's what we do. They crawled back to the engineering bay just as the drones arrived. The ship's weapons fired, blasting through the swarm. With the restored power, the drones were destroyed one by one, until only silence remained outside. The crew cheered over the intercom, but Daniel slumped against the console, his body drained. Zira stood beside him, her scales shimmering faintly. She looked down at him, and for the first time, she felt something she had never allowed herself before: admiration. In her eyes, this reckless human had shown more strength than any rule, more courage than any code. And deep inside, she realized something. Perhaps humanity's true power was not in strength or discipline, but in their ability to give everything, even at great cost, for others. That was something even the proud, Valari, could learn from. The battle was over. The scavenger drones had been destroyed, and the Aurora's spear was finally safe. But inside the engineering bay, silence filled the room. Only the low hum of restored systems echoed in the air. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. His hands shook, his clothes were torn, and soot covered his face. Yet his eyes held a spark of satisfaction. The ship had survived, and so had the crew. Zira stood beside him, watching him closely. Her sharp yellow eyes, usually cold and unreadable, now carried something new: concern. She had seen him risk his life again and again without hesitation. She had seen him push past his own limits, not for himself, but for everyone else. "You should see the medic," Zira said, her voice softer than usual. Daniel gave a weak laugh. "I'll go. When we're sure everything is stable. Ship comes. First," she frowned. "You humans are strange. Always giving more than you have, even when your body is breaking." Daniel grinned, though his lips trembled from exhaustion. "Maybe, but it works, doesn't it?" For a long moment, Zira said nothing. She simply looked at him, remembering the way he had faced danger in the crawl space, how his reckless creativity had restored power when logic said it was impossible. She remembered his words about loyalty, not just obedience, but sacrifice, too. Her loyalty had always been about following the code of her people, never questioning, never straying. But now she began to see another meaning. Loyalty could also mean choosing to stand beside someone, even when everything seemed lost. The captain's voice came through the communicator, sharp but relieved. "Engineering, excellent work. Without your quick action, we would not have survived. Take rest. The crew owes you both." Daniel gave a tired thumbs up at the console. "Glad we could help, Captain." When the channel closed, silence returned again. Zira crossed her arms and studied him carefully. Finally, she spoke. "You taught me something today, human." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" "That strength is not only in control, it is also in trust, in giving." Her voice softened, and her scales flickered with faint color. "I did not believe that before, but now I see it." Daniel smiled faintly. "Guess we're both learning from each other then." The next cycle, Daniel finally allowed himself to rest in the medic bay. His shoulder was wrapped, his burns treated. He complained that the bandages itched, but secretly he was glad for the care. Zira visited him often, standing silently near his bed. At first she only observed, her posture stiff and formal, as if unsure what to say. But slowly, her words began to change. "You fought like no Valari," she admitted once. "We are trained for years to remain calm. You did not remain calm. Yet your chaos saved us." Daniel chuckled. "Chaos is kind of my specialty." Another time she asked, "Why do humans risk so much for others? Even strangers?" he thought, for a while before answering. "Because life means more when you share it. If I only protect myself, I survive. But if I protect others, then we all live. That's worth more." Her eyes lingered on him then, and she gave a slow nod as if storing his words deep inside. Days passed as the Aurora's spear repaired itself, and tension among the crew slowly faded. The humans and Valari worked together more easily now, their mistrust softening after seeing what Daniel and Zira had accomplished. One evening, Daniel and Zira stood together on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, silent and brilliant. The ship glided smoothly, its wounds healing. Daniel leaned on the railing, still sore but stronger now. "You ever think about how small we are out here?" he asked quietly. Zira tilted her head. "Small, yes, but not powerless. Even the smallest light can be seen across the dark." Daniel looked at her, surprised by the poetry in her words. "That's actually beautiful." Her scales flickered with faint warmth. "Perhaps I have been listening to you too long." They both laughed softly, and for the first time it was not the awkward laughter of colleagues forced to work together. It was the laughter of something new, trust. But the galaxy was not safe. Reports spread of larger scavenger fleets roaming near. Valari borders threatening trade routes. The Aurora's spear was ordered to investigate, and once more, danger loomed. On the briefing table, a hologram showed a cluster of ships moving in formation, stronger, faster, and more organized than the drones they had faced. The captain looked at the crew. "This mission will test us. We may face overwhelming numbers, but we will not retreat." Daniel exchanged a glance with Zira. He saw determination in her eyes, the same fire he carried. They had already proven that together they could survive the impossible. Now they would have to do it again. When the fleet finally appeared, dark shapes against the starlight, the crew braced for battle. The scavengers were larger this time, their weapons heavy and merciless. The first volley shook the Auroras. Spear, alarms screaming across the decks. Daniel rushed to engineering, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Zira was already there, steady at the console. "We cannot match their firepower," she said quickly, "but we can outthink them." Daniel grinned. "Now you're talking my language." Together, they crafted a risky plan, redirecting power through unstable conduits to overload the enemy's sensors. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and not in the manual. But Zira no longer resisted human chaos. She embraced it. The plan worked. The scavenger fleet, blinded by the false signals, turned, their fire on each other in confusion. The Aurora's spear slipped through their lines, striking where it mattered most. Victory came not from raw strength, but from daring, from trust. When the battle ended, the crew celebrated. The scavenger threat had been pushed back at least, for now. Daniel leaned against the console, exhausted but alive. Zira stood beside him, her scales glowing faintly. "You see," he said with a grin, "chaos isn't so bad when you use it right." Zira looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a rare softness in her voice, she replied, "And trust isn't so bad when you give it to the right person." They stood in silence, watching the stars beyond the glass. No words were needed. The bond between them had been forged in fire, in danger, in sacrifice, human and Valari, different in every way, yet stronger together. And as the Aurora's spear sailed into the unknown, Daniel knew one truth with certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would not face them alone.